Good morning, everybody. I'm Ewan Leach. I'm the Chief Executive of SURF, Scotland's Regeneration Forum, and welcome to the first meeting of People in Place Practitioner Network in 2024. 2024 seems to have got off to a very stormy start, both meteorologically and economically. It's it's a little bit bleak economically out there. So we all have to hold on to our seats within the regeneration sector for this year. We're looking at housing employability and other matters. As always, we're recording today's session for future use, and you can keep your video on or you can turn it off. We'd ask you all to mute for our presentations, but that's all the housekeeping for now. We've got two presentations today as normal. We've got Gala Camacho Ferrari from Diagonal, who's looking at some software that they've been developing as a tech company, looking at, in some ways, 20-minute neighborhoods, and maybe even more interestingly, some of the ethics behind the use of technology in geospatial mapping. And if you are interested in maps, today is the day for you, because maps feature in both presentations. Our second presentation is from Maylis Garden, who is a volunteer with Women in Transport and works for Project Centre, and is going to be discussing inclusive mobility with us all this morning. So we have two interesting presentations looking at how our policies of 20-minute neighbourhoods or active travel will work for all of Scotland in all communities. And no doubt you'll have questions for our presenters this morning as well. And we look forward to having two presentations followed by Q&As. But the first presentation that Gala has given this morning will be finishing probably around about 11 o'clock. We'll have a 10-minute break before Maylis comes in at 11:15. But it's very good to see everybody. But I will now hand over to you, Gala, if you would like to share your screen.
Hello. Can you guys see that?
We can see it and we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Does that?
Yes, that's working.
Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, can you guys see the whole slide now?
We can see the whole slide.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So yeah, I'm Gala and I work for a company called Diagonal. This is our team here. We are a tech company who have a product, but we also do consulting in geospatial. And I guess I'm here to talk to you about two things. One, why we founded Diagonal, and two, this pilot we have happening in mostly in Scotland of a tool we're developing and that we kind of did through the CivTech program. Oh, sorry, that's the alarm in my office. Hopefully it stops in a second. Is it really loud? Should I go on mute for a second? Or can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you. It's quite loud, but obviously I'm more concerned for your safety, Gala. Is it a test alarm?
It's just a test, yeah.
It is a test, okay. Well,
sorry.
It should last It
shouldn't last very long. Okay, I'll keep going. There it is. Okay, great.
Okay, we can hear you fine.
Everything's calm. Okay, so let me just regroup. This is our team. As you can tell, in our team, we are pretty multidisciplinary. So even though we're a tech company, we actually don't just have developers in our team. And so there's three main things that we like to focus, saying that what we do is that we like working on really complex geospatial analysis and other data that's not geospatial, but usually there has to be a geospatial component to the problem. We like building UIs, so user interfaces, web apps, on top of the work that we do so that it help people really understand and engage with the complexity of the thing they're trying to study. And mostly we really, really like to work collaboratively in a way in which we are getting information about the subject matter expertise from people like you, so that's not coming, so that we have some in-house expertise, but the main point is for collaboration, kind of in recognition that you know more than we do about your problems and your space. So Baseline is a tool we developed through the CivTech program alongside Scottish Borders Council and South of Scotland Enterprise. And I was going to show you a demo. So this is Newton Stewart, and this tool is really focused on the 20-minute city. And what it does is that you can say, okay, I want to see all the health services within a 15-minute walk. And it shows you building to building how many services, for example, this building, health services, has within a 15-minute walk. And you can do things like see specifically for this building, these different categories. But you can also say, actually, I don't want to do a 15-minute walk. I want to do a 30-minute walk. And you can then compute that. And so you can see kind of how the town changes from an access perspective, but more importantly, building to building. So the aggregation is it's not happening, which is something that we feel really proud about, because sometimes in the aggregation, you lose a lot of detail about what's actually happening as you move across a town. For example, transport is one that I like to show. It shows you all the different transport spots, and you can see the pockets of places that people don't have a lot of access to the different stops. And we have the map is endless, so not endless completely, but you can go through different towns and kind of keep going beyond a particular boundary. And that's something that we think it's important, because although, from a government side, there's like defined boundaries, we know in practice, we cannot just say this is the boundary and I no longer care about this building on the other side. And so we believe that, it was important for that analysis to happen that way. Yeah, so I won't spend too much time on that anymore, because I want to talk to you more about the process. But obviously, if you have any questions or want to talk more about it, I don't know why this show's now small. Sorry. Give me a second. One second. Okay. One sec. Sorry, I don't know. Do you guys see it cut, or is it just me?
We can see it. No, we can see it cut. It flicked to the center briefly there, but then it's gone back to the cut.
You know what? I'll just reshare my screen so that it doesn't do that. Okay, is that better?
We can see it all.
Okay, perfect. So, great. So, okay, the way that we took the process of developing this tool was talking to the people on the ground and seeing, what were the issues? Why do rural towns feel kind of neglected in this 20-minute city concept? And so, on the left side here, I have analytical tools. And so these are things I have as a data scientist access to. It's things like I can search for things, I can route things. So I can route them through walking paths or through driving paths or through the transport network. And I can summarize things, which usually in the field is seen as aggregation. But I think what we got from what that translates to on the other side is really important, because if I search for the wrong things, it's meaningless to you. If I route through the wrong networks, then we're not really showing a picture of what it feels like for the community. And so, one of the things that we did is we got information from the people that were in the different towns, and we had feedback, and like the version that you're seeing of the platform is a couple of versions through. And a lot of what we learned was that people wanted to be able to categorize in a particular way. Something that actually is not in the current platform, but that was important, is that people talked about how walking is misconstrued in some of these analyses because there's uphills and downhills. And this is something that we're now working on. And so I guess for us, one of the biggest parts about this process was the co-creation, the fact that what we focused on, how we chose these categories, whether we decided to do it building to building or in aggregation, was something that came out of talking to the people on the ground. In particular, one of the pilots, for example, it was a person that was looking through empty homes. And so one of the things that they needed was the context of those empty homes to try and address that issue. One of the things that I think was very interesting to me is that this person was going through loads and loads of different Excel spreadsheets to try and get one information. But even then, that was a lot of work she had put into all the different spreadsheets. And then there was a lot of work she had put into kind of bringing all of those things together to then make a decision. And one of the things we really wanted our platform to show was not a decision, but rather the information for you to make a decision, which is something kind of really important to me as a data scientist and someone who can build systems that can take decisions, kind of choosing to say, actually, it's much better to engage you in the information rather than to just make a decision for you, because then we lose a lot of we lose the ability to make real decisions that actually work for the people. Yeah, so part of that same rhetoric, I guess, goes with the fact that the information and data that we used here was open. And so I have found in a lot of different local councils that there's a lot of talk about how they open their data, but there's not a lot of talk about how they use open data to inform their decisions. And so this tool that you saw here, all those building footprints, all the information about the services, this is data that is open, and it came from OpenStreetMap. And so OpenStreetMap is like, as it says here, it's editable map by volunteers or just general people. And you can go on it and you can say, actually, this thing is wrong and I'm going to fix it. And then you can do that. If there's no building footprint, you can go and draw it. You can also have a file and import it in. And so one of the things I really like about OpenStreetMap is that if our tool is then presented to the public and the public see an issue in the data, one can say, well, that's great. We don't have the resources to fix it, but you can. And one of the things that I think that really does is it gives everyone accountability for the analysis that's being done. Like we can be held accountable for example, using the most correct data, but actually we need the help of the people on the ground to do that. And I find the OpenStreetMap to be a really nice avenue for that. It's not always the correct thing to use, but for this purpose, I believe it's a really nice way to say, hey, you are part of this. You can engage in this analysis too. And Bedrock is the engine that we use in order to compute all the routing to understand what is nearby, what is far away, and via the different manners like walking or by public transport. And that one is open too. So if you do have a very technical team in-house, you can actually go and use it, and you can talk to us about that too. And we think that's important. Okay, so I want to talk about this concept about this open data because a lot of times it's not very complete. And so this town that you see here is also Newton Stewart. This was at the beginning of the project, and we saw that there was just not a lot of buildings, just not a lot of data. And one of the things we did is we reached out to the local OSM community in Scotland, and we said, hey, we're doing a project here. We want it to be better. Do you have volunteers that could plot data? And within a few days, this was the town. So improved streets, we had all these buildings. There was, I think, 1,000 buildings added within a couple of days. And so I'm showing you this to tell you that the community building this map is actually really powerful and kind of really ready to get involved. And we thought this was a great example of that, because that means in your project, you can do that. And what's really cool about this data is once it's there to use for you, but also everyone else can use it, and really kind of says, hey, if you have a project that requires this data, you can use it too. And I think that's really powerful. Yeah, so Skyline is the next version of Baseline that's coming. The difference in Skyline is that it adds the exploration of scenarios. And the reason we wanted to do that is exactly from all the feedback we've gotten, which is like, okay, it's great to get nowcasting, like this is what's happening now. But what happens if I want to change this street, or if I want to change this land use, or if I want to make all the parking lots into parks? How does that change accessibility to green space? Or what happens if I want to make low traffic neighborhoods and I want to close all these different intersections? And then you want to see like the different accessibility and in the different methods in which it's going to affect it. And that's one example, but that's in the works, and we are launching that in March. So we're very excited about that. And same, if you're interested, please get in touch, because we'd love to talk to you about it. If you're an early adopter and feel like you can take on technology right at the cusp, this is a great thing to get in touch about. Okay, so to the more kind of theory part is that one of the things I wanted to talk about was why did we build this in a co-creation manner? And I guess for us, when we founded Diagonal, one of the things that we had noticed being in technology is that the people who are building your technology, they're influencing it because they're taking decisions, they're taking assumptions. And when they do that, you might be too far from the process to realize it, or even to understand the mathematical kind of drawbacks of having chosen one method versus another. And so we believe that it's really important that the company has a stake in building good technology. And we wanted to be that, which I know is ambitious, but what else is there to be except ambitious? So we really believe that we need better tools to design for change. And as a data scientist myself, the reason I wanted to start Diagonal was because I believe in civic technology, we need tools to help us make better decisions, not replace us. And we need tools that actually help us think further and more deeply about the problems that we're having, not to replace our thinking. And I think that's really important and something I really want to stress, because it's a lot of technology now is really pushing towards replacing our thinking, not really helping us think. And so, so two main differentiating factors that Diagonal has are multidisciplinary team and this kind of co-creation, which I've already talked about. And the second thing is that we believe company governance has something to do with it. And so I guess maybe the question is, you go and you hire someone to build something with you, for example, and how do you know that they have the same values, that they're attached to the same thinking that you are? And so we believe that honestly, it's really hard to measure that. But one way that we're trying to push that agenda is through our company governance. So we're a steward-owned company, which means that we've set up kind of another, like a NGO company that their sole purpose in our board is to ensure that we're building responsible technology. There's other things that they have, but that is, for the purposes of this talk, one of the most important things, which is that if we were to say we're going to build something in which does not fit under our definition of responsible technology, they're able to veto and say, actually, you can't do that. And so that's a little bit existential as a company, but we believe is really important because right now we're small, we can make good decisions about what we do and the projects that we take on. But if we were 100 people, that becomes really hard to have transparency over how that is being evaluated internally. And so that's a kind of a commitment we made to ourselves, and we try to make it legal. And we're also employee-owned, which means we believe that makes our employees take more accountability for the work that they're doing and feel more responsibility over it. And then we open our technology, which is what I talked about, so that if there was that technical person in your community that wanted to understand how these algorithms worked, how it got calculated, because maybe they see something is off or maybe they're interested, they're able to do that and they're able to replicate it. And we believe that's something really important in order to build trust with your community. So whether they do it or not, the fact that they are able to do it, we believe is really important. So it's not a black box. And that's it. That's my talk. Thanks for listening. And please take down my email, and any questions, if you want to talk more about any of these topics or anything like that, please do get in touch. I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you very much, Gala. Gala, keep sharing your screen. I wondered if, Gala, you could go back to baseline or open the baseline tab that you had open.
Oh, yes.
And maybe play around with it a wee bit more to sort of illustrate the sort of domains that are searchable on it.
Yes, I think I'm only sharing a tab. Let me reshare, because I think when I reshared, I shared a tab only. Let me reshare the share. Okay. Yes. Can you see that?
Could you? Yeah, we can see it. Can you sort of play around with it and show us a little bit more and tell us what the different colors and tones mean within it?
Yes. Okay. So sorry. Yeah. Okay, so the different colors tell us how many of these particular services are nearby. This particular computation is doing a 15-minute walk to all the categories. And so right now in all, we're including doctors and pharmacy. But we can be more selective. We can say, actually, just do doctors. And then we can say, do that for, let's say, a 30-minute walk. And somehow, sorry, my internet's a bit slow. So let me... Okay, there we go, because all I already had loaded. So, okay, let's do it like this. We have a 15-minute walk. And so you can see that, for example, these gray ones only have access to one health service. And then as we expand to a 30-minute walk, we can see that now, all of these same buildings now have access to 2 or 3 services, which are located here and here. And so obviously expanding the time obviously gives you more reach. But the question is there a pocket that, doesn't fulfill that? And then the other thing you can do is you can actually say, okay, well, what about by bus? And obviously that hugely increases access. But I guess like one of the things I really like about this is usually when you see this picture, you see like a data zone, and then you're like, that data zone is blue. And then this data zone is, and you see an average, but now you actually can see it building to building. And for example, you can see that these buildings, they get a bit shafted. And so the question is, in this algorithm, right, where in this algorithm has a lot of decisions, like it's using a network, and that network has details that are potentially correct or incorrect. And this is why the hills is something that is coming, because walking 10 minutes for me is not the same as walking 10 minutes for you. But in particular, the question I put out there is there something the algorithm should be considering? Like, for example, crossing a light, and can we include that in that algorithm to make it more truthful to your place? Maybe your place doesn't have any lights, and so that's not something we should be including. But that's where I talk about when there's flexibility. The other thing is you can click on buildings, and you can see, okay, well, this pub, cool that I hit on a pub. Okay, well, within a 15-minute walk, it only has 1 health service. This could be a residential building but for example, access to 25 different bus stops. And so this was, for example, really useful for the person that was working on those empty homes, because they could now actually locate the home, and then they could specifically see how that home was doing, because they were actually having to decide which homes to reach out to try and bring them back onto the market, if that was possible, and to provide support for them. So like different people need different things. We can also do, I like the schools one in Aberdeen, in this one, because you get a very different picture. And so in the schools one, you can see that actually, there's not that many schools here. And that could be a population, but if you were deciding whether you wanted to place a new school there or you wanted to close a school, this might be the kind of picture that you want to see, and you want to make sure you know exactly which areas are going to be hit the hardest. Yeah, does that help a bit?
That helps. And I think one of the questions that has come up, I'll let you answer, but are the distances are using paths, not as the crow flies?
Correct. Yeah, definitely. Routing, I mean, honestly, nowadays, if you're using as a crow flies, like, you got to get onto 2024. Like, why are we using as a crow flies when there's so much software to do the actual walking path? The crow flies, sometimes this doesn't happen too often, but I've done this analysis in Australia, for example, in Sydney, where there's a lot of bays, and sometimes it tells you have access to things across a bay that you clearly don't have access to. This happens also a lot with rivers, or which in Scotland we're pretty used to. And so I think like we have to be using walking paths. It's definitely using walking paths. In particular, is using the walking paths in OpenStreetMap, which aren't perfect. Like, there's definitely lots of things that are needed for it. But as I said, like, if we were showing this to the community and the community is like, actually, there's a walking path, I don't know, like across this area here. Well, tomorrow one maps that path, and then one reloads this overnight, and now that's everything's recomputed with that path now included. Like, to me, that's super powerful for like in a community consultation. That would be super powerful.
And what about if there were barriers on a path? So if there was, could you do a search for non-stepped access, for a non-stepped route?
Depends where you are. So that has to do with the quality of data. So there's places where there's been big efforts by the OSM community to map steps. And so in there you could. But what's stopping, for example, if you were doing a project, that part of your project is actually getting the community and just online mappers to help you map all the steps in your area, especially for places, rural towns in Scotland, for example, that are smaller. Like, mapping that is not an effort like it is to map London, and so if we could do that, and we can do it via the community, but also via already kind of mappers that do this, then really it's just a bit gathering data. And I also want to emphasize, once you do that, that data is there for anyone to use. And so if there's a person in your community who is tech savvy and who wants to start doing something else with that information, they now can. Like, you've not just created data for your own self, but you've now created data for someone else to rejoice in and do something cool. I mean, for me, that's really powerful, because right now maybe we have kind of lower, the bar of using technology to do stuff is really lowering. And so I'm seeing future generations are going to be able to make these kinds of things a lot easier than we were and that we are. And so we also want to prepare for that and give them that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gala, for the presentation. I'll open it up to the floor. If you've got questions, raise your hand. If you've got questions, you can also put them in the chat. We do have a question in from Robbie McCauley, and you've just referred to it there. Can you explain how you access the local OpenStreetMap community for support? It sounds like a powerful way to improve available data.
Absolutely. It's in my slides, which will be shared, but I'll also, I mean, there's loads of different ways. They have a wiki page, which I can put in the chat if that's useful. And that tells you, because there's worldwide communities, then there's communities, for example, that are for the purposes of humanitarian aid. Then there's a community, the local OSM community, like Scottish one. They have these like, you sign up your email and then you get basically anyone that asks a question. So there's lots of ways. I'll put some of the links in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Lauren McNiven has her hand up. Do you want to ask a question, Lauren?
Yeah, thanks. I think you kind of touched on it a wee bit, but I was just wondering so that 15-minute walk, what is that kind of, is that based on distance? Because obviously a 15-minute walk would differ depending on a lot of factors. So
yeah, so that one's based on distance, and it has a specified speed, which in the background you can see, and it's like clear. But yeah, I agree. Actually, we ended up doing the minutes because that's how people talk about the 15-minute city. But if you see the first version of it, it was actually meters. And so it actually just said 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters instead. Because me personally, I like the meters. But I think general people don't want to talk about meters. They want to talk about minutes. But, well, first, that's something you could select for your purposes. But also that's something that gets affected, for example, in this upcoming version that has the hills, because that's what you knock on. You kind of say, okay, well, now going up the hill, instead of going at this speed, you actually go at a way slower speed. And so, yeah, it's based on a particular speed, and it's based on a particular distance.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
There's another question from Beth Landon asking, how much take up for this tool is there by local authority planning departments across Scotland, or is it just Scottish Borders Council at present? No, we have the pilot run for 7 different places, and 5 were in Scotland. Veronica is on the call, and I'll have her in the chat say more about exactly what those are, because I can never remember off the top of my head. But it wasn't just Scottish Borders. I think one of the ones I showed you was Aberdeenshire. So it was the Dumfries and Galloway was the other one I showed you, I think. So Scottish Borders was just the way the CivTech program works. It needs like a sponsor of the problem. And so Scottish Borders was the one that kind of, alongside SOCI, was the ones that brought that to say, hey, we want to build something around investment kind of questions. Yeah. Okay. And when you were working on it, so it's the local authority practitioners that are using it, but did local people use it as well? No, I don't think our pilot covered that. I mean, our pilot was not very long. I think it started in September. And in the pilot, it's like you do stuff, then they tell you information, you go and you build more things and you show it again. So really, they didn't get it for like this super chunky time. They kind of get it weeks at a time. So it's just that. But yeah, so in particular, because all these questions are coming, like, get in touch about Skyline, because that's really the big one. And
and really excited for your input about how it can best be used.
Okay, you can see Veronica has put something in the chat. You worked in Aberdeenshire Council,
yeah.
Manchester City Council, Dumfries and Galloway, and also co-working space business, Hometown Hub. It's not yet commercial, but so it's a research project. Because the reason I'm asking about the local use is because obviously local place plans are the new thing for communities to use, and mapping it's a spatial plan, so mapping is part of that. And so, do you think, is there an opportunity for, and I'm not aware of people being encouraged to use OpenStreetMap as a basis for their local place plans? I don't know if that's something you've come across in your work, Gala.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think here's the things I've heard from people when I tell them about OpenStreetMap. Well, one, when you're kind of gathering data for your particular purpose, you want to be the owner of that data. And in OpenStreetMap, you don't get that. In OpenStreetMap, you put your data there and then it's in the wild, like if people think it's wrong, they can change it. And there's a process. And so it's not that willy-nilly, like people don't just add random stuff like an alien was here, but there's a process, and also it's constrained. There's particular things you're not allowed to add, and there's particular things you have to add in a particular manner, and so it might not fit the way that is being done, but you can gather your data and then push it onto OpenStreetMap, and that's not very hard to do, and there's lots of tools to do it out there, and there's lots of mappers that will do this very happily. I think so it can kind of happen in tandem. Yeah, so did that kind of answer your question?
Because I'm going to ask a sort of general question to our audience here, and I don't know if we'll get an answer to this, because everyone has their cameras turned off, but we have quite a lot of people from local authorities actually on the call, and I wondered what platforms are they using for this sort of research? Because we know that everyone's trying, 20-minute neighbourhoods and isochrones, etc. Everyone's kind of beginning to research this, and over the past couple of years, we've been talking about this quite regularly, and we're getting quite sort of varied. Some local authorities are doing research on their own. Some are doing it to a regional approach. Paul Davis has come in with an answer. GIS is what our data mapping folks use in Dundee.
So I think this is GIS. It's just different GIS. But I think lots of people, at least what I have seen, is that they do kind of like a desktop effort for their data mixed with the data that they've already got. And then I would say most local authorities have ArcGIS or some Esri tool is what I think is the standard and the most common. And I just want to say, this is not trying to be a database, right? I think OSM itself is a database, but our product is trying to do analysis that if you were to do on something like ArcGIS, it would take a huge effort and it would have a really slow feedback loop. And what we're trying to do is say, if you speed up that loop, actually people can get involved from the beginning. And so then the analysis can be created, as opposed to you saying, hey, GIS team, make me some maps, here you go. Then when it comes back, you're like, actually, I'm seeing all these issues. And then it's like, okay, well, 3 weeks later, here's like the comeback. What you want is for it to be often, because if you can find a way to do that often, the local plan doesn't, you can keep track of it like every month, every 2 months, you can kind of do things as you go, as opposed to this huge effort, which is what I think I see happens, is there's a huge effort for the local plan. Then it's like, it's finished and it's like, take a breath, and now another effort for the next one, and what if that was faster and a little bit more automated in some of the bits? And again, we want tools that help us, right? So we don't want the tool to replace the whole process, because the whole process lets local authorities unveil a lot of information and change their perspective, or maybe change their focus. What we want is that some of this kind of analysis they have to do for it is just there, and is there accessible constantly, not just in the one period when they're doing this local plan this part of the local plan.
We've had some responses to what's been used, what other people are trying. Somebody's using Flora Studio, saying it's not great. So yes, but to me it's interesting, because there's that whole thing of across, particularly local authorities, is there one approach that Scotland could take that allows local authorities to adapt them to their own individual needs within that local authority or within areas within the local authority, while using the same a consistent approach? Because there's value in that. There's maybe an economy of scale of having a Scotland-wide approach, but allowing flexibility within it, rather than each local authority or each city region coming up with its own. And also, I think for practitioners, thinking of a lot of the self-employed practitioners that I know, having a consistent platform that they can use across Scotland, so that people, they can, wherever they work, they're operating through a similar system.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Gala? Paul Davis asks, will it be feasible to amend walking speeds as a user of this in the future? E.g., older people's speed versus younger people's speed. And I should, that was at the back of Lauren's question, because Lauren's doing a PhD on this, and I was at her seminar yesterday.
100%. 100% is in the path, and 100%. Actually, there's a few conferences. Hopefully soon I can get in touch and tell you I'm presenting at them. But I've pitched actually a talk talking exactly about that. I believe the title of my talk is 15-minute city for who, and then it talks about how we need to talk about distances, because different people with different mobility, 15 minutes is meaningless, right? So even now with a little baby, I'm like 15 minutes, not anymore. We're like 50. So yeah, definitely something that should be editable in the future. And actually, if you have anyone there in your GIS team, for example, who can code, they can use our engine, and they can in fact do a lot of these changes themselves. Okay,
thanks very much, Scala. Michael, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, if I may. Hi there, Gareth. Thanks for that. That was really interesting. I know it's a really big ask, but I suppose I've been thinking about sort of the walking, wheeling thing a lot recently. In terms of sort of accessibility for people, say wheelchairs or mobility scooters, obviously the distance time thing, you've mentioned that may be customizable going forward, but in terms of how that accessibility sort of varies for those people, would there be any way, and I know it's gathering a lot more data to do this, to actually start to think about how those routes might differ, for example, for people who are using sort of different sort of that aren't walking but actually on wheels? I know that's actually a huge extra layer on top of this, but I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, let me just say, I'll tell you the good news first, is from a technical side, it's doable. If we can find the data, we can add that. Like our routing engine has the ability to say, okay, actually avoid steps. Just like it says, if you're walking, avoid these particular roads, or if you're driving, avoid anything that's a pedestrian walkway. So from a technical side, that's doable. From a data side, actually, when I've looked at the OSM data, it's not complete enough to be useful. But if, for example, you were from I can't see now where you're from, but if you were from a local authority, and as part of the project, we undertook the mapping of where these steps were, or not just steps, but places that where the sidewalks are really non available to a wheelchair, which is a lot. And we did that, which OSM has the ability to do. Then we could recompute it and do that. So it's not, from a technical side, it's not above and beyond, really. It's quite in the first, it's quite a tangible exercise. From a data side, it's also a tangible exercise. I think the question, for me, and maybe as a data scientist, so I don't know that much, is more like, how do we get local authorities to have budgets so that they can undertake these activities as part of their, their big thinking and stuff? Because a lot of times what we find is that a lot of these activities come lumped with a bunch of other activities, and then smaller organizations like us, we just have to partner with bigger companies to undertake the whole lump. So I guess it's like, is it an analysis piece? In which case, it's yes, definitely I can do that. But if it's a, part of a huge piece, then I think it's like a process problem, you know what I mean? More than it is a technical problem.
On the back of that question then, so if you were to look at something where it was to include barriers to wheeled travel, it would need to be, the OSM community could possibly do some of it, but you would actually need experience on the ground. That someone also, Paul's mentioned in the chat about lowered curb data being added in, and the way you're going to find that out is actually by knowing the route and knowing the space. So you would require people who were local to have OSM editorial capacity.
Yes, and let me just, it can be, I would just want to say I focused on OSM here because that's what we used. But us as a consultancy, if you were to come to us with a project and you have that data, we can inhale that data too. And we can put that onto the network and then we can compute everything through it. So maybe it's more like as a platform, it's doing X. As a consultancy, we can do X plus. Or as a consultancy, we can just do Y. We can do something completely on the side of this. So I guess it depends what exactly the project is. But yeah, if we have the data, the point is if the data is there, technically it can be done, and it's not like it would require years of development. Like the algorithm, we've made it flexible because we made these algorithms for urban planning, where we know routing is not like routing trucks. That's like pretty standard. Trucks can only go on certain roads that are well mapped. We know that for urban planning, we needed to make our routing algorithm flexible, and it's like that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring Emma Black's got a question. I'll bring Emma in.
You're on mute, Emma. I don't know if.
Yeah, you're unmuted now.
Hi, sorry about that. Butterfingers today. Thanks very much for your talk, Gal. It's really fascinating. I find it really relevant to the work that I'm doing in Your House, West Pilton. So at the moment, I'm gathering lots of retrospective community consultations and analysing it through place in 20 minutes. Now, my question is quite similar to Michael's, because we're really interested in individual journeys and what the barriers are. So lots of the consultations are showing things like damaged pavements, street lighting. So those sort of barriers that are physical barriers, which is great that you've explained the kind of process you'd go through for that. But the question that I've got really is about some of the data that we're seeing is showing that some areas are seen to be unsafe. So physically unsafe or threatening areas. And this does affect people's journeys, but how could we use this data in an ethical way so we wouldn't be sort of stigmatizing areas or stigmatizing sort of micro areas within communities? Because I'm aware that our community does deal with a lot of stigma, but it also is a very relevant point that some people won't use certain pathways at night or through the day, and that is having a huge impact on their lives. Good
question, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would maybe just start with, I think I'm very unqualified to answer that question. Like from a practical side, I like psychologically, I don't actually know how you would undertake that. What I can go back to my comfort zone in the data side is that a place feels unsafe. There's loads of reasons why it could feel unsafe. And exactly as you touched on, like some of those reasons are in the built environment. Some of those reasons are kind of maybe things have happened there in the past, or maybe it's nearby something that's scary, or maybe I don't know, it doesn't have anywhere to cover. But things, for example, like lighting and like the pavement not being well, or for example, it being far away from businesses. These are all things that in my data science mind are computable. Like you tell me what they are and I can go and I can code and I can compute them. And so maybe going back to my comment about like tools that help us not replace us, which part is in the built environment? And that one, if we have the data, we can compute. And that doesn't get you 100%, but if that gets you 50% there, you've already at least got a target of places of like, hey, these ones don't have the right combination of things to make them at least feel safe, right? And that narrows it from an entire town to a small part of the town, right? And once you have those places, you can then evaluate kind of from a more qualitative data, like people telling you things. And I think what you then start doing is saying, okay, well, I'm not going to look at the whole bit. I'm going to look at the ones where the infrastructure is missing or is not correct, or we know from research it doesn't yield quite safe feeling places. Then we're going to get the qualitative data. Then we're going to put it on top. And then I think the question is, how do you build a visualization that then helps you understand all those different dimensions so that you don't have to be like specific this place. But what you could do is, okay, these places don't have lighting, so now we have to invest in lighting for these places. Or actually, we've decided every place needs to have you know, this nearby or this next to it. And so how do we enable like land use in order to do that? I think from a data side, what you can do is view those things together, but I think exactly how that happens feels to me more like a problem for someone in the community space or in the psych space, because I have no idea, you know, but I do know that it helps to have the physical things, because those are fact, like, is there a light or is there not a light? And that is computable. And when it's computable, it shouldn't be something that's unknown to us. Like, where is there lights? Once we gather the data, we know where there's lights. And if we can have data about where there's benches and about when there is a sidewalk, I think all these things are things we can compute. And to me, that's where technology should play a part. Like, once we know those things, we can visualize where they are, and we can at least say, okay, these places don't have the right components. And that's something we can change today. Like today, I can say this place needs a light, and a light can get put there, avoiding all the technicalities of funding. But you know what I'm saying? Like that's something actionable, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'll get in touch. Definitely, it's really fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. That was a good question, and it may tie into Melis's presentation that's coming up. And some of the discussion, I'm thinking Melis may have stuff to comment on this as well. We've had two other questions in the chat. One was about your scenario planning one, the what if, particularly in what if we restricted access to car access in certain neighbourhoods, how would that shift behaviour to active travel? Could the tool be used for those what if scenarios?
Okay, like I hope so, because that's really, I think, really important for me, and something that's something that I think we really need to address as society. But what I would say to you is get in touch, because if we can get you into the early adopters, and you can help us decide that, because you know more about what shifts people's behavior than I do. But what I can do is understand your thinking about the different tests you want to run, and I can code them. And so for me, it's like, you tell me what you've observed and what you've experienced and what you've learned in your work. And my job is to tell you which of those things I can compute and which of those things I can present to you. And so I think for me is like, I'm not sure, I'm hoping that's the huge hope. And so get in touch, and then you can be part of kind of pushing that so that it is useful for that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Kath McNally is asking, are local authorities forthcoming with data sets, e.g. the codes and locations for lampposts? Or is that something that happens separately with the OSM community?
I mean, we've never had local authorities not be forthcoming with data. What we have had is that the people that we are working with in the local authority are not the people dealing with the data. And so then there's like 20 hoops you have to jump through to get a data set. And then once you get it, it's like either too late because the development had to start, or it's maybe incomplete, or maybe it's partitioned in ways that aren't useful. And so what I would say though is, well, one, that's one of the reasons to put it on something like OSM that's a little bit more broad. But I've never seen, and all the times I've worked with local authorities, they've always, when they have been able to, from a legal standpoint, they've always been like, here's all our data, like, please use it. Because I think they put so much effort into making this data open, into making this data usable even by them, that I don't think they've been like, we don't want to give you this data. I think, I don't know, the lampposts, I've only ever done a project in Australia in my previous company with lampposts. And the local authority, the problem that they had was that no one had mapped it. So they actually just didn't know. They just didn't quite know where they were. And their data set was missing heaps of new ones. Of old ones. And so it was like historical ones that weren't there, all the new ones that, or anything that had broken, they had in their map. So it was more like they actually didn't know where there was error, or they didn't know where was good or where it was bad. And so it was more actually a data problem than it was an analysis problem.
Okay, thanks very much. That was a good comment from Anne Marta. around 20-minute neighbourhoods being so much more than infrastructure, which is, I think, what our 2 years of discussion has kind of really emphasised, that there are some basic things that you're wanting in a 20-minute neighbourhood, but there is so much outside of the planning system that is to do with quality, to maintenance, perceptions, that will be the key to success in delivering 20-minute neighbourhoods across lots of communities. And obviously these have been touched on in the questions that we've had here, and I think in previous presentations that we've had by Living Streets Scotland, looking at quality of experience and quality of
definitely
access, which are quite hard to kind of map spatially with data, because they are changing as well. You know, sometimes there may be barriers, they're temporary barriers, so that bit of data may come and go.
And I mean, I also just want to say, like, it's important. I guess we don't want our tool to do it all, because once a tool kind of does it all, in my opinion, then it's trying to make this decision for you. I guess our tool does very specifically what I said, like computable built environment things. That tells you nothing about loads of stuff, including like well-being. All we can do is like, what are the markers of the built environment that kind of can lead to that? Like having a park nearby statistically says it helps you, you know, kind of feel better, but that doesn't mean that if you're near a park, you now feel better, you know, like that's only like this point of the part. There's still like this picture. So yeah, the tool is only trying to do the really tangible computation, but also the data that we should always have. To me, when I see that local authorities are working in this problem, and they are working so hard to try and find this information that we can compute, that, like, to me, that's like horrible, because I'm like, wow, from a data side, that's so computable. That shouldn't be your barrier anymore, you know, like, yeah.
Okay, we've got no more questions in the chat box, and nobody's got their hand up. So I'm going to say thank you very much to you, Gala, for sharing. I'm glad that you came along to our physical meeting, and we managed to meet then. And you obviously made other connections at that. So it was really interesting to hear more about the project that you've been working on, the baseline, and looking at the scenario sort of what if kind of one as well. But I mean, I think the thing that I took most from our one-to-one chat and from today was in creating tools to help us think, not replace our thinking. It was really kind of helpful to have that kind of said out loud, particularly when people are looking at using software. And I think you referred to it's not a black box, and about making sure that everyone is thinking about that as they're choosing what sort of software they use for decision making, so that well, partly so that people don't think there's some kind of conspiracy behind what's in the black box that is unknown, and then you can project anything onto that black box. So I think it's been really clear that from diagonal standpoint and from your standpoint, it's really important that it's transparent. So I think that's a really good thing for us all to take away and think about, is when people are commissioning software. And it would be separately to this, talking again to the audience in general, it would be interesting for us to hear. You can email us directly about what your experiences are within local authorities of this sort of mapping, and what challenges you're facing, or what sort of platforms people are exploring. It would be interesting for us to hear, to be able to share with a wider network. And yes, somebody's asked, the slides will be shared. So yes, the presentations will be emailed to you probably later today, if not today, tomorrow, and they'll all be put on our website as well. So Gala's presentation will be available. So Gala, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening.
We are now going to, it's 10:54, so let's take a break just now for 10 minutes for people to go and grab a cup of tea. And if we all come back at 11:05, and then we will hear from Mavis on inclusive transport and inclusive travel. Thanks very much, everybody. And thank you again, Gala. So our next presentation this morning comes from Mavis Garden from Women in Transport and Project Centre, is her employer. And I think we are going to carry on maybe exploring a theme that the discussion has already begun going into. So Mavis, do you want to share your screen with us?
Thanks a lot, Ian. Actually, I'm going
Oh
to
no,
ask
it's
Emma
Emma's.
to
Yes,
to
Emma,
work
did
out
you
the
share
tech
that? I forgot.
because it's not quite worked for us this morning
Yeah.
as we were rehearsing. So apologies. I'm going to do the Prime Minister thing and say next slide, please, as we go along the presentation. Thank you so much for having me today. It's really great to deliver the presentation just after Gala, because I think there are a couple of themes that will be worth exploring, particularly around safety and walking, etc., etc. I've really enjoyed Gal's presentation, and I found it really inspiring. Thank you so much for your passion. And today I'm going to talk about place-based regeneration and inclusive mobility, and I'm going to present on some of the tools that have been used in the field and some of the lessons learned. So next slide, please. For a little bit of context, I am a transport planner. I've been doing this job for about 10 years, and I work mostly on regeneration schemes and master plans. So that includes public realm, active travel, urban freight, individual sort of master plans. And really the way that I describe what I do is that I try to come up with strategies to make space on the streets for people to walk, cycle and enjoy city life. And really this has two components, which I'm going to refer to in my presentation quite a lot. One is movement and the other one is place. As Ian said, I currently work for Project Centre, which is a multidisciplinary consultancy. I'm based in Edinburgh. I've got projects all over Scotland and north of England as well. And as a side gig, I'm a volunteer for Women in Transport. I've been with them for more than 7 years. I'm a board member, and I'm also the chair for the Scotland region, which was launched in 2021. We've got, at the latest count, 84 members in Scotland and 1,500 members nationally. The mission of Women in Transport is to advance women in the transport industry through events, mentoring, networking, book club, etc. We have four pillars, four strategic directions, if you like. One is women's safety, one is decarbonisation, one is inspiring the next generation, and one is intersectionality. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you will see a couple of examples of the stuff that we've been up to in the past year or so. So today really for me is about bringing those two roles together and share some examples and lessons learned about gender inclusive mobility as part of place-based regeneration, which all of you are involved in. So sometimes it's referred to as gender mainstreaming, which I find a little bit jargony, but in a nutshell, it's about considering the gender needs when planning and designing places. So the presentation I'm going to give today is a summary of different approaches and evidence that I've gathered over the years and that I've been active in this field. You'll see that I'm not trying to push one approach over another, and that's because I really believe that different problems need different tools. So I'm not tied to what Project Centre is doing. And indeed, this is really not a sales speech, but more of an overview of the thinking and practice on the topic. So we'll get started by talking about the problem. And if we can move to the next slide, please. First, we'll talk about movement, and I'd like to get us started with a quote from Caroline Criado Perez, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. She wrote this very seminal book called Invisible Women, and this book exposes the unseen bias in our everyday life, and it demonstrates how women are systematically excluded from everything from medicine, health and safety, disaster relief, technology, and indeed transport. And there's a quote in his book which says, when planners, it's not just planners, planners fail to account for gender, public spaces become male spaces by default. And I think that's just a really interesting and important message here, is that there's a default position, which is the male position. And transport and mobility in general is often considered quite neutral. It's about moving stuff, moving people around. But actually, when we look a little bit deeper, we realize that it does not systematically account for women's unique travel needs. So for instance, the fact that women as a majority undertake more multi-purpose trips. So that's when you do several linked journeys as part of one journey. So you might drop the kids to school on your way to work, for instance, or you might stop, do the shopping on the way back from work, or visit an elderly relative. That sort of, it's linked to the care duties in general. And then That's the demand that we've got. And then on the offer, the capacity side, what we have is very limited off-peak services, and they're also most of the time designed along commuter corridors, which doesn't really match the journeys that women are doing. A couple of stats for you to really show the problem of movement. 92% of women say that their biggest fear is being sexually harassed or assaulted when traveling, and 94% of women have felt threatened when using public transport. And then another one is that the transport sector in which I work only has 21% of female worker, which reinforces the imbalance in how transport and mobility is planned and designed. So on the right-hand side of this slide, there is a diagram which has been prepared by another consultancy called Atkins, and they've had a really good attempt at embodying and explaining how all of those issues with movement manifest themselves for a fictional character that they've called Zara. And Zara works as a nurse, and she lives 10 miles away from the hospital, and she commutes by train, but she has to walk nearly a mile between home and a train station, and she works in shifts, which means that she needs to make those journeys very early, very late, and in the dark for many months of the year. So on that slide here, what you can see is actually some of the ideas that would go through your head. I'll let you read through the slides and some of those ideas, but I think some of them are really telling. The fact that you've got your keys in your hand so that you don't have to wait at the door. You don't want to take the bus, but equally that the path, the shortcut to get to your home is not well lit. And it's sort of that constant sort of thinking which forms part of the problem when cities or urban spaces in general are not designed by thinking through the needs of women. So next slide, please. There's a clear challenge for spaces that we've identified as the first and last mile, so between the home and the destination or the transport hub, and that's the movement function. But there's also a very clear challenge from a place perspective, and I think many of you in the audience involved in Regeneration will have this topic very close to your heart. So I won't attempt to describe what place means, but for the purpose of this, it's really recognizing that people in my role as transport planners play an important part in planning and designing what happens in between buildings, alongside with urban designers, public space specialists, landscape architects, etc. And the reality is quite grim. I'd like to start with a quote from some in-depth research that was carried out by a charity called Make Space for Girls. It was carried out a couple of years ago in England, and this is a quote that says, "There's nowhere for girls. There's literally not a specific place for girls. There's places where we go, but no space for us." And that came from a 70-year-old girl. And I think to me, it really embodies that idea that the default is always male. Facilities and public spaces for teenage girls tend to be poor because the default play provision is skate parks, BMX tracks, football pitches, multi-use game arenas. And you've got a couple of examples on the right-hand side of the slide that really show that to me. In the future sites, you'll see some play areas which have been designed for and with teenage girls, and they look radically different to this. So like I said, you've got all of the links as well for all of those references in the slides that'll be circulated. So one key resource I would say is Make Space for Girls, which is a charity, like I said, and it does an outstanding job at campaigning on those issues. Why does it matter? Because it impacts how successful places will be for communities. It's got implications for health, a sense of belonging. Obviously, there's a UN Sustainable Development Goal, which is gender equality, and then it's got a myriad of positive snowball effects from improving inclusivity of urban environment. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but just in case it needed reiterating, there are a wide range of lasting consequences of achieving inclusive mobility as part of regeneration projects. Amongst the top ones is safety and access to opportunities for a wider range of people, sustainability, physical health, and sense of pride and belonging. And I tend to always go back to those metrics from from the Backlife survey of 2019. And if you look on the right-hand side of that survey, the second element, which says people who do not cycle but would like to start, and then you have disaggregated data, which is really important to provide evidence and to really support communities that are underrepresented and marginalized in place-based regeneration. And you can see here the untapped potential of so many different groups that would like to cycle but don't even know where to start. So I think it really shows that there's a massive difference that can be made. So next slide, please. What can we do and how? I've got 3 slides here, and they all present a different scale of action, if you like. The first one is more about the general tools, and the second one is more about what called the place-based tools. And then finally, I've got a slide on process-driven interventions and co-design of places. So to start with the more general tools, here I'd like to present 2 of them. To tell you that generally research agrees on a number of key interventions that are necessary to progress towards gender inclusive mobility in places. On the left-hand side here, you can see the Get It Toolkit, which was a research project funded by the Future Transport Vision Group, and it shows the wide range of policy areas which need to be addressed to promote better balance in the design and planning of transport systems and the areas that they serve. So one of them is about collecting disaggregated data, so understanding different responses between male and female and other, but not just that, obviously a number of different characteristics. Another policy area might well be strengthening networks that are away from those mass commuter corridors. So typically that would be bus and active travel. Another example is conducting gender safety audits, more on that in the next slide, and investing in bystander intervention training. So again, we're looking at something completely different from putting a pedestrian crossing here. We're really talking about, you know, the more behavior change part of the change that's required. And then an enormous part of that as well is diversifying the sector to make sure that there's more representativity. On the right-hand side, I did promise some examples of play areas which have been designed with and for teenage girls, and I think you can really see how different it looks from the previous slide. Like I say, Make Space for Girls, it's got an amazing resource library. It's got loads of research, guidance, case studies to really bring benchmarks of what good looks like, what can be done and how. If we just take it up a level, generally the interventions look at better lighting and toilets. I think those 2 are just common to everything I've read over the past 7 years, really. Other specific examples for play areas would include recommendations such as more swings, bigger entrances, smaller play areas, more seating, and circular path around the edges of those play areas. We'll move on to the next slide, please, which I think a couple of you might be really interested in. So there are a number of approaches that have been developed commercially by different consultancies and have been trialed. So I'd like to mention 2 of them. The first one is the Get Home Safe, which has been developed by Atkins, and which is on the left-hand side here. And then on the right-hand side is the Safety Inclusion Assessment, which has been developed by WSP, both consultancies. They both place a strong emphasis on safety by looking at various components of a specific space, both the negatives and the positives. So on the top left, you can see in green the positives and in purple the negatives. And their main purpose is to identify the shortfalls of what is currently there and then suggest pragmatic improvements. You can see on the left-hand side, between the top and the bottom of the images, an aspired before and after, and what you need to bring based on that toolkit in order to make the space more inclusive and more welcoming. And then on the so just to go through a couple of examples, it's improved lighting, active frontages, which creates passive surveillance, public transport information. A lot of the time you have public transport information, but it's not real time. So you never know when buses might be coming, for instance. And then very importantly, a well-maintained environment. On the right-hand side, there is what I found particularly interesting is how the assessment has evidenced the need to realign footway and cycle paths to create wider and more direct routes. But if you zoom on the right hand side, far right of the slide, you'll see that the assessment has been carried out at night and during the day, and the difference between the scores at the top and the bottom are widely different. And it was in Liverpool Street Station down south in London, and you can see that once it's dark, the space feels entirely different, and I think that's a really, really important thing to do. So you might not want to use the full tool, but actually if you do your site walkabout, do it during the light and during dark times, because you'll find it very, very different. We'll move on to the next slide, please, which talks about process-driven change. So it's a third angle to the solutions, and I think all of those talk to each other. It's not that you've got to choose one or the other, but this is less about the solutions and more about the process that you go through. And many of you in the room, I'm sure, will value how important community engagement is to get the right proposal early on in the design process, and you know that it affects the designs very positively. But fundamentally, what it also does is that it empowers people, that makes sure that voices are heard. And so the examples here that I'd like to present, so one that none of them are local, I'm sorry, but if you do have examples, please bring them to me. I did try to find some Scottish examples, so please feel free to. The first one is the redevelopment of the town hall in the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and it's been redesigned at the moment, and that will include a town hall and also some new homes. And what they did is that they set up a disabled residents team to support the co-production of the designs, and they were helped by private consultants called Proudluck Associate, and the outcome of the co-production, so it's just a few examples. You can find more on the website where you have the link here, but some of the examples that I found really interesting was including wheelchair storage in the homes, making sure that the entrances to the dwellings are accessible, don't look any different to any other entrances, provision of changing place facilities, etc., etc. And the second one on the right-hand side, and Emma is going to help us screening a video in a minute, but the second one has been done by Project Centre, and it's for Deptford High Street, so it's also in London. It's a big high street regeneration project, and over the summer they set up a consultation webpage with a survey, an interactive map. They had 1,000 responses. They talked to over 250 people at market pop-ups, workshops, site walks, etc. And what came through that is that a high number of the community feedback focused on safety concerns, and most of this feedback came from women who shared experiences of antisocial behaviour and harassment, particularly on the high street. So what Project Centre did is that we partnered with Our Streets Now, which is a movement of women, girls, and people of marginalised gender who battle against sexual harassment across the streets, and they work collaboratively to organise a personal safety site visit of the high street with 15 local girls to find out how to make this a safer community for them. And then they shared the design, and that included more lighting, again, trees, pedestrianised area, and all of that could help addressing some of the concerns and the shared suggestions and comments on how to improve the area. So now, Emma, I'm gonna ask if we can possibly screen the video, if possible.
Fingers crossed.
Look at that, it's seamless. Thank you.
You can get catcalled or harassed easily as well. Have you and your friends experienced kind
of at the start?
We hope to get
Yeah,
more
it's not at the start, yeah.
Today we're working with Our Streets Now to facilitate a personal safety site visit of Deptford High Street with 15 local women and girls to find out how we can make this a safer community for them.
So they've looked at interventions such as new trees, different lighting, how we make a space feel cleaner and brighter.
I mean, there's not much lighting, but at night time, there's like rainbow lights coming from that bridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
You think they're bright enough?
Yeah, they're bright enough. They look really
Would you come down here at night?
No.
Definitely not.
Why?
It's just like how this street is mainly adapted with people who's like mainly doing something suspicious.
Taking a longer route round because you're worried,
Especially when I'm by myself.
how does that make you feel?
I mean, you get used to it.
Even when you're wearing your uniform, you can get catcalled or harassed easily as well.
Have you and your friends like experienced kind of
We hope to get more of this done in the dark when we've got new designs made and just keep the community really engaged and involved in the decision-making processes to make sure that what we create for them really meets their needs.
Thanks so much, Emma. I just have one last slide to conclude, to summarize some of the lessons learned from these different approaches. There are really some key place-based interventions that can be made around landscape, infrastructure design for safety, ambience and comfort. Lighting is massively important. The human presence, the community feel is also scores really, really high in everything I've read. And particularly when it leads to well cared for and well maintained environment with a lot of TLC is a very important part of making places more inclusive. And then finally, there is a layer of digital resources such as real-time public transport information, such as safety apps, that sort of thing, that can be layered on top of the physical interventions, if you like. Other elements, co-design, I'm a huge advocate for this. I think early engagement of all groups is massively important to influence the designs, including gender from day one in the thinking, particularly at early stages when we're talking outline business cases is very important. I can talk a little bit about the PCT tool, but might save that for questions if people are interested, but they have a gender equality scenario. And then finally talking with those different consultants that have trialed those approaches, what they told me they've learned over the years of doing them is thinking about your own biases as you carry out those processes, and also thinking about the safety of your own team, obviously, as you go around in some dark spaces. On the next slide, you will find my contact details, both at Project Centre or Women in Transport. I'm very happy to take on any questions, and thank you for listening to me this morning.
Thank you very much, Melis. That was very fascinating, and it did dovetail well with Gala, which I would love to say was on purpose, but it's a happy coincidence that you two are able to present today. The Make Space for Girls. I remember coming across that. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but I miss Twitter because Make Space for Girls was fantastic on Twitter about making people think about biases around play spaces. So yes, that was excellent, and I think one of the points you've ended on there picks up on, throughout my career, the whole places having TLC, places being cared for, are fundamental, and in a lot of community consultation and community work that you do, that everyone does, it's the lack of maintenance that is underneath lots of complaints and dissatisfaction with places that people live or people have to go to. So it's really interesting to hear that come out. Has anybody got any questions for Melis? Either you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. Ian McCall shared the attitudes towards walking and wheeling as well.
I should say, actually, a little bit of promotion for women in transport. We're having an event on the 20th of March called Gender and Active Travel. It's not me speaking, it's actual experts. So it's all free and it's hosted in person in Edinburgh. So if you'd like to join us, the registration is available from the Women in Transport website.
Okay, well, we'll make sure we share that with the comms after the event so that everyone gets that. What date is that?
20th of March.
20th of March. Okay, we'll make sure we get that shared, and we'll put that link in there. One of the questions I had for you was at the very beginning, at the start of the presentation, looking at women working in transport and it only being 21%. In bringing this, I mean, the agenda is now there. What is the response of the industry, of people of the men in transport in taking this on in their thinking?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a really good question. So the response is quite varied. I think we've moved. I was reading someone's comments on LinkedIn yesterday that said that there were 4 scales of consciousness and competency on the level, and you move from unconsciously incompetent on the topic of equality, diversity, and inclusion to unconsciously competent, basically. And I think you have very strong allies in the field and men that have stood up that are continuously supporting and promoting women and building that capability across the board. But there are subsectors where you still have a macho culture that is prevalent. Women in Transport did some research in 2021, a white paper that we published, which is also accessible on the Women in Transport website, which really shows the scale of this. It's over 70% of female respondents that said that, you know, they have experienced macho culture in the organization that they work in as part of the transport industry, and clearly that doesn't support increasing the representativity of the workforce.
Okay, unsurprising, but a shame to hear. Caroline Austin has asked, is your work related to gender budgeting?
Well, actually, I've got the Scottish Women's Budget Group coming to the event on the 20th of March. So yes, I'm talking with them regularly, find their work fascinating, massively important. Myself, not directly involved, but obviously, like I said in the presentation, it's touching upon so many different policy areas that budgeting and, you know, follow the money is always a very, very important part.
That's good to hear. And it obviously makes it your event on the 20th even more interesting to our audience. I suppose there's a wider question I have around co-production and co-design of spaces. One of my queries for professionals within disciplines is why sometimes they need to bring that in. Why the training that transport engineers maybe have. Does the training now take into this? Are people being trained at an early stage, and the issues of gender inequality being made apparent so that they are aware when they go on to work in the profession they're designing it? Because currently we have, I suppose, a lot of stuff that happens, and you need people with lived experience to then give advice to the designers or planners or urbanists. And my question is, why are we needing to mine that information? Why is the information not actually within the profession itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of that response is lived experiences. That's 100% spot on. The other one is the actual training doesn't cover that at all. Well, maybe it's changed since I've graduated, but I don't think it is. So my background is in social sciences, but I work constantly with engineers, and this is definitely not part of their curriculum at all. They are highly intelligent individuals, but in their day-to-day jobs, they spend a lot of time, you know, looking at 2D, 3D drawings of physical constraints rather than what I would do, just walking around spaces and trying to understand it from a different perspective. So I think that's where some of the gap is. There's a huge effort in raising awareness. This is part of me raising awareness amongst different communities about the need to consider this, but I think there's a long way to go.
Okay. We've got some other links coming in with other books that people are suggesting people have a look at on this topic. Are there any other questions or reactions to what Melis has shared with us?
Women in Transport's got a book club as well, where some of these books are being discussed. I think it's every 2 months. So for avid readers, there is a community for you out there.
Emma has a question for you.
And I could work on mute this time, which is
You
great
have.
progress. It was a fascinating talk. It was really, really interesting. And just something that occurred to me when during the film, when one of the young women said, "You get used to this," which is a horrible state that we're in, but we've all said stuff like that. And I was wondering if there was any studies that show kind of how things layer upon that. So if you're young and fit and you're moving about and you feel frightened, then how do those layers increase with age and disability and childcare and things like that? Are there any studies to show the kind of differences and different layers that women experience?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Emma. Thanks for raising that. I'll have a dig into one of the Mixed Space for Girls research, because they've conducted quite a lot of focus groups with young girls. And then what they did out of that is that they did some qualitative coding of the responses in order to identify key themes and how they related to each other. So I think there is potentially something in there, but I can't promise anything at this stage.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Emma. Anyone else got any other questions? Gala, you putting your hand up there.
Yes,
Yes.
my physical hand. Yeah, I was really shocked at the stats you shared right at the beginning. And I've heard and just by practice, the multi-purpose trips, you know, how women do more of those. But I wonder, is there a good example of someone who's done both, like done a model with more multi-purpose trips and then one without, to kind of show how the different outputs, you know, like to show the delta of like, hey, because transport modeling constantly ignores multi-purpose trips, you know,
it's complicated.
Here's like, you know, because I when I was a transport modeler back in the day, there was a lot of like, should this road go here or not kind of stuff. And I'm interested to know if there's any good examples out in the wild of like, actually, if we would have included multi-purpose trips, the decision would have been different, which I know for sure there's examples of, but I wonder if anyone's put that on a paper or in a presentation.
So not to my knowledge, the only thing I can think of is the work around a propensity to cycle tool, which is a little bit different to multi-purpose trips, but that is a tool that's been developed by different academics to look at what would happen if, for instance, the population of X place would have the same proportion of people cycling as they do in the Netherlands, or what would happen if actually women cycled just as much as men, what would happen? And so they're starting to develop some of those scenarios, and what you get as a result is the map that I had in my conclusion slides that shows you know, how trips done by cycling might differ under those different scenarios in different areas as a result of that. They're also looking at the moment, I think they've got one in development for travel to school as well, which I think will be potentially really quite interesting. But you're right, as I'm also for my sins, I've also started my career in transport modeling, so I know how difficult it is to actually include multi-purpose trips, because it is by nature it avoids modeling, because it avoids generalization. It takes into account so many particularities, particular journeys, and that's why it's complex, it's difficult, and that's why it's not developed commercially, I think.
Could you speak a wee bit, because you said you might come back to the propensity to cycle tool. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's a publicly available tool, and I'm sure we can pop the link in the chat at some point. Like I said, it's been developed by researchers and people working in academia, computing a number of different data sets, and the idea behind it is to show how people would be likely to cycle under different scenarios. So if so the most common example is the one that they call the Go Dutch scenarios. What would happen if the population of town X was to cycle just as much as the Dutch do? And it's a how spaces might look like in the future, if you like. So it's a, yeah, I would say it's a tool to really understand how you can plan the infrastructure for a desired future.
Okay, that's I suppose I have a question on the back of it. Yeah, Lauren, who asked the question in the previous session, her seminar yesterday was talking to her researchers looking at older people's experience of low traffic neighborhoods and trying to see some of the quotes that were in her research were around how elderly people felt about people on bikes and the conflict that arises there. And I should confess, I use a bike for most of my travel. I own no Lycra, so I'm a certain type of upright, boring cyclist that doesn't go anywhere fast. But the rhetoric around that conflict between pedestrians and cyclists, it seems very noisy. And is it noisy because the infrastructure we're delivering isn't good enough? Or is it that it's not extensive enough yet to have allowed a sort of separation out between the two?
Yes, great question. I love that one. And I said in my intro, all I try to do is make space for people to walk and cycle. So if we look at A Street, we will have a limited width that we can play with, and we've got design standards that myself and my designer colleagues have to align with, which is that we need to make sure that there's enough space for an emergency vehicle to go through, for instance, and that we've got disabled parking spaces, for instance, access to shops are maintained, that sort of thing, which means that if you look at a street in a section sort of way, if we cut the street in two and you look at the width that you've got available, you've got a really clear dilemma of people that are going to win and people that are going to lose if you try to make a space for pedestrians, a space for cyclists, a space for parking, a space for the cars, a space for the bus stops, and then the same thing on the other side of the street. And in most of our cities, the urban fabric is old, which means that we don't have that space unless we knock down buildings, which we can't do because people live and work and shop in those buildings, which means that sometimes we have to make compromises and choices. It's one of the projects I'm working on at the moment. I've been looking at that quite closely, actually, because if we do share the space between pedestrians and cyclists, we know that that's going to increase the occurrence of conflicts between the two users, and that's something that the community has very quickly picked up. So we're trying to understand what that might look like and whether or not it is feasible and realistic.
Okay. Lauren, you've appeared. Lauren, do you want to, because I was quoting your research, Lauren, I don't know if you want to make a comment on it.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to chime in on some of those findings. So like you had mentioned, a lot of the older people were kind of wary of cyclists and thought that there was a kind of lack of consideration there for maybe pedestrians on the cyclist's part. But another issue that came up that was maybe less relevant for those findings, but even where cycle lanes are separate from pedestrian paths, so I'm thinking of a specific area within Edinburgh, they're part of the road, but they're sectioned off from the road with bollards and things. Some older people did say that that was an issue for them as well. So the likes of maybe a bollard or a little bump in the road, if they are crossing the road, it's a hazard, pretty much. So I think that as well kind of plays into the negative ideas around cyclists, on top of the fact that they weren't very well used in that area. There wasn't many cyclists and people thought they were a bit useless. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to pitch in with that as well.
I'm sure there are people from Sustrans in the room, but I've always read from Sustrans that it's first and foremost making it good for walking. And I massive and wheeling, obviously, and I massively agree with that, and then making it good for cycling is the next layer after that, because if you consider the first and last mile, what happens as you literally step out of your home before you even get onto your bike, you need to walk to wherever your bike is. So for me, it's the very first meters of that first mile really that we need to account for.
I mean, my observation would be an active, moving to a more active form of travel is behaviour change, and people are naturally resistant to sometimes behaviour change. And so when the change is coming in, we will have to learn new skills, and and I suppose that any of us that have walked or cycled in cities that have high cycling numbers, you have to have a much higher level of awareness around you, because there's a lot of cyclists around you, even as a pedestrian. And I think that going through that period of change will be bumpy. Metaphor on purpose. We have some other comments, and we have a lot of comments from a number of people with other suggestions. People saying it's a bit depressing that gender equality is still not. We're still having to address it. Obviously, we're having to undo millennia of deep sexism. So yes, that will be an ongoing thing. Beth is saying at a local place plan level, in my experience, it's more men than women involved in leading the process, although there is an awareness of ensuring gender equality and community engagement. That's an interesting observation.
It's the extra layer. You need to go outside of, you need to go out. If you just, again, the default is male, so they will come naturally to the event. So if you want the women, you've got to find other ways of engaging. Why? Because more care responsibilities usually, which means that they're busier.
I recall, I know that one of a public consultation that took place in the Kirkgate in Leith, which they set up in the Kirkgate, away from the shopping, but at school time. So they were catching mothers and children to do that. So it was a very purposeful way of kind of addressing that agenda. And Marta has come to the Welsh Government has a play standard for spatial planning, which is interesting to look at. And Ian McCall has included research from Pass for All and commenting on the fact that the majority of Scots are in favour of 20-minute neighbourhoods. There's obviously a lot of noise and social media, etc. And I would say we tend to tune out that noise, because we think that I don't know if any of you have looked at the consultation responses to the 20-minute neighbourhood draft guidance. There were a lot of responses. The majority of them were from individuals, and the majority of those individuals had very negative views of 20-minute neighbourhoods, but they were very specific in that they all thought it was a restriction, and came with, it was almost as if they hadn't read what the policy said, but had read something else that described 20-minute neighbourhoods and 15-minute cities, and were responding to that description, which was that you'll be locked in your home or your neighbourhood, which is clearly not what the policy agenda is around it. It's about us getting out and about as much as possible. So it is interesting how that high sort of acceptance level, and the fact that Ian's commented that population groups most likely to strongly support the concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods include women at 36%, and people with children in their household of 43%. Does anyone else have any other questions for Melis on specifically on gender, or maybe wider transport issues? Based on, because I think you put yourself down by saying you're not an expert. You are an expert. Clearly, you have a lot of expertise and experience that you've had over the.
It's because I'm used to hosting other people talking on the topic. It's basically how it's come through, and as opposed to people like Lauren who are developing their own research, I guess.
Okay, if we have no more questions, I will then thank you, Melis, for a really fascinating presentation, and something that's a really important issue for SURF to be part of and to raise. So thank you very much for offering to come and talk to us about this. And as has been said by both presenters, by both you and Gala, the presentations will be available after this. They'll be circulated. They will be put on our website, and people can click. All the links are clickable in the PDF, so people will be able to find further research. So thank you again, Melis, and you're also getting more appreciation in the chat. So make sure you read that. Thank you very much to everyone else for joining us this morning. This is the first event of the year. Our next event is on the 28th of March. The topics that we look to possibly be discussing are green space master planning, and maybe, fingers crossed, 20-minute neighbourhoods, a regional approach to 20-minute neighbourhoods, what that could maybe look like around a sort of city region perspective. It's not definitely confirmed, but we hope to have that on it. And if you go on our website, all the dates are set for the year. Emma will no doubt put them in the email afterwards as well, so that you can mark them in your diary, and we'll continue sharing the topics closer to the date of the event. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much again to Gala and to Mails for really fascinating presentations, and to the audience who participated in the discussion as well, and to wish everyone a good rest of the day and a good 2024.